your bans off our bodies. Keep your bans off our bodies. Keep your bans off our bodies. Today is day one of an uprising to protect abortion rights. It is day one of our feminist future. And it is day one of a summer of rage where we will be ungovernable. I will see you in the streets across America this summer continuing to fight.
That is the head of the Women's March at a rally for abortion rights in Washington on Saturday, promising more protests after the leak of the draft of the Supreme Court opinion that would overturn Roe v. Wade. Now the Homeland Security Department is preparing for the possibility that violence could happen over the course of the summer. Today, Oklahoma lawmakers passed the strictest abortion ban in the country. It makes exceptions only to save a woman's life and for rape and incest reported to law enforcement. I'm joined now by Women's March Executive Director Rachel O'Leary Carmona. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me what you mean, Rachel, when you talk about a summer of rage, and what do you mean when you say we will be ungovernable?
Well, I think it's fair to say that women are angry. You saw that over the weekend with over 450 marches and certainly turnout in excess of 30 to 40,000 in D.C. And so we're going to channel that rage into action as we have done over the last 5 years of Women's March, advocacy. And that means taking to the streets, protesting, talking to our elected officials, and certainly taking our power to the polls.
But when you say ungovernable, what does that mean? Are you telling people that they need to stay within the law or that they should be outside of the law when you say ungovernable?
I mean, in our opinion, the Supreme Court's leaked draft indicates that the Supreme Court itself is putting women of this country on a crash course with the law. We do know that the legal status of abortions actually doesn't have much of an impact on how many abortions are provided. And so when women have to make a choice between an unjust law and deciding when and how to have a family, including, no carve-outs or exceptions for issues of rape or incest or things like that, we are going to make sure that folks get the abortion care that they need in whatever way that we can. And that means building power electorally, taking our power to the polls, and it means building power locally, as we've done for the last 5 years.
Well, let me ask you this. You say vote and make your voice heard. Does that apply to everyone in the country? Because that's when you overturn Roe v. Wade, you're putting it back to the states, in which case people in those states are, they vote on a referendum or they vote for their the people who are representing them. And in some states, people don't want to have abortion legal, or in many states, they want it to be 15 weeks or 20 weeks, which is 4+ months into a pregnancy. So should those votes be heard as well?
I'm really glad that you brought this question up because I think that there's a problem with the way that we talk about this. Over 90% of Democrats do not want Roe versus Wade overturned, and that's probably surprising to no one. But also over 50% of Republicans don't either, and over 80% of independents. And so when we talk about this, we're not talking about, folks who have been outvoted. We're talking about a supermajority of Americans whose will is being subverted by packed courts and by legislation that has not worked for us. But why not just let them vote in their states? Why not let them vote? Because you've got 54% who think that they don't want to see any abortion after 15 weeks. And you're right, even in our Fox polls, we show let it stand at 63%. But when you go beyond the question, when you go past the point where you say to people, it's been around for 50+ years, do you think it should stand? I think most people say, oh, yeah, it should stand. Then when you get more specific and you say, should someone be allowed to have an abortion after 15 weeks, 4+ months of pregnancy? They say, no, that should not be allowed to happen. Well, you bring up two questions there, and they're two separate questions. The first question is, I think, around voting. And we've seen, in many different states across the country, attacks on voting rights and things like that. And so if we have an opportunity to vote in a fair election where everybody has equal access, I think that, that would be different. But we have to understand the connection between the attacks on voting rights, the attack on abortion rights, as part of, a broader campaign and strategy. And so I think that's one piece. But I think the second piece here is that there are
So wait a second. You're saying that we can't trust
here.
any of our voting systems, so we can't allow
No.
people to have that choice to vote on it because you have questions?
I'm saying that the voting rights have been attacked in the same way that abortion rights have been attacked. And so when we're talking about a vote, the piece here is that this legislation and the decision of Roe versus Wade is being handled in a way that takes the democratically expressed vote out of it. It's going through courts that have been packed by specifically Republican candidates, and it's not representative of a majority of Americans, including a majority of Republicans' viewpoints.
When you have a justice, right, who's nominated by a president, right, then you have senators who come together to advise and consent on that nomination. Those senators are voted by people in states all across the country. And as I said, you say vote and make your choice heard.
States.
So, well, you can't say vote and make your voice heard and then say, but if people are opposed to the way you want them to vote, that their vote isn't going to count because of other grievances that you have. It's either vote and make your voice heard and allow the American people to do that or not.
I think that you can say that we have to go over and above the obstacles that have been put in front of us and the difficulty to vote. And I think that that's very clear. If we were not, if we were aligned and if we were really serious about letting folks, have their voices heard, we could have a day off for voting. We would have more access to voting. We would have mail-in voting or different ways that we know has worked for, other countries, and certainly ways that we saw work during the pandemic. And so I don't think it's a serious argument to say that we're going to take this back to the states, specifically on a day where a state like Oklahoma has all but banned abortion starting from the day of conception.
Well, that may be how people want to vote in Oklahoma. And don't you think if that's how they vote and they choose their elected officials and they press the lever that says that that's what they want, that they should be allowed to have that representation if that's what the state of Oklahoma wants to vote for?
In an election that is not with gerrymandered elections and that we're not restrictions with a vote,
you can't pick and choose. You're either going to say vote and make your voice heard, or either you're in favor of democracy.
I'm saying vote. Everyone should vote.
Okay.
Everyone should vote, and everyone should make their voice heard. And at the same time, we can recognize that those votes are happening inside of a system that is imperfect, and that specifically targets communities of color and poor people, and increasingly making it difficult for women to get out and vote. So we can hold both of those things to be true. Actually, they're not mutually exclusive. We can say everyone should absolutely vote, and it's harder for some people to vote than others.
Okay. Well, we will see, if this happens, what happens when it goes back to the states and what the American people want, state by state. They will have that choice and they will have that option. I hope you'll come back because it's an important conversation, and I appreciate you being here, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.